A millionaire heiress is discovered barely alive in the scorching desert by a rugged rancher who never expected the storm of violence, corruption, and corporate secrets that followed her. As Serafina Wolf fights to protect explosive evidence hidden by her late father Jacob Wilder, risks everything, his ranch, his life, and his heart, to keep her safe from ruthless corporate thugs determined to silence her. But can two people from completely different worlds overcome gunfire, betrayal, and life-threatening danger to find justice and maybe even love in the unforgiving Arizona desert? If you want to know how this breathtaking battle unfolds and how the strength of two brave hearts might conquer even the most sinister enemies, listen to the end of the story. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to support and follow many more amazing, unforgettable stories just like this one. In the unrelenting glare of the Sonoran sun, where even the hardiest cacti twist into defensive postures, a woman lies on burning sand. Once upon a time, this woman commanded conference rooms high above the bustle of Manhattan, where her sharp heels and sharper wit cut through billion-dollar deals without mercy. Now in a place where the horizon shimmers with heat and hope alike, she drifts in and out of consciousness. Her dress, once a pristine slip of designer silk, is ripped nearly to ribbons. The gloss on her lips is cracked, and her nails, once fashioned into perfect ovals by a salon that charged the price of a mortgage, are broken and caked with dirt. A diamond ring sparkles on her finger, incongruous against her battered hand. It's worth enough to purchase entire swaths of land. 48 hours ago, Serafina Wolf was the picture of city sophistication, power suits, strategic brilliance, and a Manhattan office with windows that touched the clouds. She had no intention of ever stepping foot in the desert, let alone collapsing onto its scorching terrain. But secrets have a way of forcing even the most capable individuals into exile, and this was no exception. Her world had spun off its axis with terrifying speed, leaving her stranded amid tumbleweeds and scorching rock. High above her, a hawk circles, its screech echoing across the desert's empty vastness. Time stretches and warps Serafina's dry lips. Form words that never fully emerge, locked behind a throat rasping with thirst. At some distant point in her mind, she hears the beep of an elevator, the hum of a Manhattan street, the reverberations of threats on her burner phone, each memory weaving like a phantom through her delirium. She has barely enough strength to move her fingers. The unyielding sun batters her with wave after wave of heat, punishing her for venturing out unprepared. Serafina, who once sealed mergers worth hundreds of millions, can't so much as lift her head to scan the horizon. If someone doesn't find her soon, she will vanish into the sand. Another grim story of a wealthy traveler undone by her own hubris or by the lethal secrets chasing her down salvation arrives in the form of a rugged figure atop a sturdy stallion. Jacob Wilder has lived in this desert his entire life, the land's rhythms etched into his veins. The creak of his saddle and the soft clop of hooves announce his presence before he dismounts in a swirl of dust. His eyes, the color of parched earth, widen at the sight of a woman who seems to have dropped straight from the marble corridors of Manhattan into this desert purgatory. Though he cannot know it yet, her life is no ordinary life. Her secrets will collide violently with his unassuming ranch world. He crouches beside her, pressing roughened fingers to her neck. There is a pulse, faint but present. Gently he lifts her in his arms. The torn silk and the glinting diamond both speak of wealth beyond his comprehension. But in this moment, Jacob sees only a human being on the brink of death. As his stallion, Thunder, nickers softly nearby, Jacob realizes that carrying her to safety may bring consequences he's never imagined. He secures her across the horse's saddle, careful not to aggravate her injuries, and sets his jaw. They begin their slow trek back to the Wilder ranch. Jacob has no inkling that in helping this mysterious stranger, he is about to upend everything he's ever believed about good evil and the delicate line that separates them. Sometimes a chance encounter in a place as stark and merciless as the desert uncovers truths nobody wants to face. Jacob Wilder and Serafina Wolf are about to discover just how intertwined their fates have become, and how impossible it will be to return to their old lives once the desert has revealed all it intends to. 48 hours earlier, Serafina Wolf stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office in Manhattan. The city lights sprawled below her like fallen stars reflecting off glass and steel. In her hand, she turned a small silver flask, old enough that the engraving had begun to fade Sirdodotchu for the battles ahead. With love, Dad. It was her last tangible connection to the man who had inspired her drive, taught her to master the boardroom and left her far too soon. The morning had been triumphant. She'd orchestrated the hostile takeover of a rival corporation. Song International, run by the cunning Felix Song. Such a coup would normally warrant champagne in her world, but a slew of anonymous messages had shattered any sense of victory. Everything you built is a lie, Serafina. We know the truth about Shanghai, pay us, or the world will know too. The triple threat texts had begun 2 weeks back, always from different numbers. She had grown used to the hush of secrets and the whiff of blackmail, but tonight felt heavier, as if on cue the elevator behind her chimed. At this late hour, the building was nearly deserted. Her personal assistant had left hours ago, so who could possibly be stepping onto her private executive floor? Serafina's grip on the flask tightened. Her father's favorite whiskey still burned her throat, fueling her courage. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, heavy, decidedly male. She slipped the flask into her designer handbag alongside a newly purchased burner phone. No turning back, she reminded herself, I knew this day would come. The door opened. Felix Song stood there impeccably dressed, his angular face betraying no warmth. Serafina, he said, voice silky, burning the midnight oil. She turned, sliding effortlessly into the poised mask she wore in every negotiation. Felix, I figured you'd be drowning your sorrows somewhere uptown after our board meeting. It couldn't have been easy watching your family business slip away. He smiled without humor. It's funny how clarity comes once your illusions have been shattered. I've done some digging into what really happened 3 years ago in Shanghai. Serafina gave nothing away. All contracts were vetted by my legal team. If you're implying some wrongdoing, he cut her off. I have proof, Serafina. Proof of how your father forced my father's hand to sign over controlling interest in our company. Proof of forged documents, blackmail, and bribes. Whatever the truth is, the authorities will be very interested. She arched an eyebrow, feeling her pulse spike. You should have brought that proof to this conversation, Felix. He dug into his jacket pocket, retrieving a USB drive. Oh, but I did. 2 men in suits stepped in behind him, the bulge beneath their lapels suggesting private security. This is only a fraction of what I have. Felix went on, including your father's lost records. He was thorough, Serafina. Arrogant, but thorough. Her mind raced. She'd spent years anticipating threats like this, mapping out escapes, illusions, and false leads. The real evidence was safely hidden. She only needed to execute her plan before everything collapsed. Felix's stare was unyielding. You'll transfer your newly claimed shares back to me, along with a full written confession. By tomorrow, otherwise I release everything, and we both know the SEC would love to see you in court. Serafina set her shoulders to convey exhaustion. The paperwork is at my penthouse, my personal safe. Felix nodded to his men. Then we'll accompany you there. Feigning compliance, she gathered her laptop, which she'd already wiped clean of incriminating data, aside from planted misdirection. She stumbled just enough to hit the silent alarm button near her desk. Protocol 0, no backups, no rescue, just a clean escape route. She followed them to the elevator, her heart pounding like a war drum. They descended to the private garage in unnerving silence. As they reached a black SUV, Felix's men edged closer, corralling her. But the moment she passed a certain support column, bright lights flared, and her own carefully placed security trap triggered. She swung her heavy handbag at the nearest guard, feeling the reassuring crack of metal on bone as the flask inside made contact. One pivot of her ankle's specially designed heels with a retractable blade sent the second guard sprawling. Felix lurched for her, but she was too fast, diving into her own reinforced sedan. Bullets ricocheted off the armor as she roared out of the garage. In her rear view, Felix was screaming into a phone, but she was already merging onto the highway, heading away from the life she'd built. She dialed one number on the burner phone. It's time, she whispered, Destination B. Burn everything else. Within hours, she was on a plane forging a path of false identities and decoys determined to vanish for at least 72 hours. She needed to regroup to figure out how to save herself and preserve her father's real legacy. Outrunning Felix Song's network of hired men was only the beginning. Serafina's decision to hide in the Arizona desert was less a stroke of genius and more a calculated leap of faith. She chose the Sonoran backroads precisely because the dryness and scorching temperatures would deter most pursuers. She rented a luxury car under an alias intending to find a remote motel and hole up until she could plan her next move. But the desert, indifferent to her carefully laid schemes, had its own intentions. When the car broke down miles from any main road, she cursed the heavens, her father's memory, and her own arrogance. Cell service was spotty. The water bottles she'd packed were too few. The scorching sun turned the desert into a furnace. Before long, she found herself on foot, staggering through the sand. She'd undone the top buttons of her blouse, kicked off her heels, and cursed her foolish choice of attire. Hours later, her phone overheated and died along with her last coherent plan. Back in Manhattan, Serafina had bested the world's sharpest minds. Here she was losing a battle against thirst and merciless sunlight. She made it further than most might have, perhaps out of sheer willpower, before her body finally gave in. The last conscious thought that flickered through her mind was that she must destroy any device that could be tracked, including the phone with those threatening texts. Then the heat haze swallowed her. Jacob Wilder found her at sunrise, just when the desert's temperature dipped momentarily to offer a false sense of relief. He had been out checking fence lines saddled on his faithful stallion, Thunder. The dryness in the air seemed normal to him, a second skin he'd lived with all his life. But he noticed the unnatural glint of a luxury car half buried in the sand. Easing Thunder closer, he realized someone had been desperately trying to flee him. Tracks zigzagged in circles, then vanished. Not far from the car, he spotted the motionless figure in the distance. Dismounting, Jacob approached slowly. Rifle ready, in recent years, the desert had seen its share of cartel drop-offs, criminals on the run, or lost migrants. He expected the worst. Instead, he found a woman so thoroughly out of place that she might as well have been from another planet. Her dress was ruined, her makeup streaked, her lips blistered, yet there was still the faintest flutter at her throat. Jacob's rancher instincts kicked in. He lifted her gently, feeling how scalding her skin was. She muttered something he couldn't make out, her eyes rolling back. Her diamond ring caught the morning sun, almost blinding him with its brilliance. All that wealth, he thought numbly, and none of it worth a thing out here. Cradling her carefully in his arms, he placed her on Thunder, swinging up behind her. He rode as swiftly as the rough terrain allowed, mindful of every jolt. The Wilder Ranch was several miles away, a green blot in an otherwise relentless landscape of cacti and rock. As the sun climbed higher, sweat beaded on Jacob's brow, and the woman sagged against him at times, gasping for air. A single word escaped her lips. He thought it sounded like run, but he couldn't be sure. By the time they arrived, his foreman Diego had already spotted them. The ranch hands rushed to help as Jacob slid her off the horse. Diego's eyes widened at the sight of a half-dead society queen in their dusty yard. He called for Doc Higgins, the local physician who had seen everything from rattlesnake bites to gunshot wounds out here. Jacob carried her inside, carefully laying her on a spare bed. As he looked at her face, he felt a pang of concern. He was used to rescuing lost hikers or overheated travelers. This woman seemed something else entirely. Something about the tension in her brow, even in unconsciousness, spoke of a deeper danger. He removed her ring to keep her fingers from swelling and set it on the bedside table. It sparkled in the lamplight, a silent testament to all the mysteries she carried. Jacob had no inkling how entangled his life would become in those mysteries, or that her pursuers, wealthy, ruthless, and well-connected, would soon be knocking on his very door. Tupri, paragraph 4, approx 500 is 600 words. Doc Higgins was a wiry man in his 60s, sporting sun-etched wrinkles and an ever-present stethoscope slung around his neck. He examined Serafina with brisk efficiency, dehydration, mild heat stroke, a couple of nasty scrapes on her hands, he told Jacob, voice low. She's lucky you found her, or we'd be burying her by sundown. Jacob stood with arms folded, leaning against the bedroom doorframe. Will she make it? The doctor adjusted an IV drip. She will if she rests and rehydrates, but her temperature is still high. I'll stay until she stabilizes. Serafina stirred hours later, mumbling in half-delirium. Jacob was at her side in an instant, pressing a damp cloth to her forehead. She tried to rise, eyes glassy with confusion, but he murmured a soft reassurance. Easy now. You're safe. Her gaze flickered to him. Confusion warred with caution in her expression, as if she expected an attack at any moment. Where her throat was too parched to form the rest of her question, Wilder Ranch, he replied, closest patch of civilization for miles. I'm Jacob Wilder. The tension in her posture lessened a fraction. She nodded or tried to, but a wave of dizziness forced her back against the pillows. Doc Higgins ambled over, checking her vitals. Any headache, nausea? She blinked her dryness, making it hard to articulate. Both she managed. Jacob poured water into a glass, handing it to her. Serafina reached out with shaking fingers, glancing quickly at her left hand. Alarm darted across her face when she noticed the missing ring. Your ring's on the table, he said gently. Didn't want you losing circulation? Relief passed through her features. She took a tentative sip, eyes never leaving Jacob's. Over the next day, her strength rallied enough for short conversations. Through halting admissions, Jacob gleaned that she'd traveled far to escape dangerous people. She offered no specifics, only that she couldn't risk a hospital or a formal registration anywhere. They'll find me, she whispered, hands gripping the bedsheets. They have eyes everywhere, Diego brought in. Serafina's purse recovered from her stalled luxury car. It was half scorched by the sun. Inside, Jacob found a phone with a cracked screen and a fancy silver flask. The phone powered on long enough to reveal alarming text fragments. We know your secrets. Shanghai fiasco. Payment overdue. Then it died for good. Something about this haunted Jacob. He dealt with rattlers, rustlers, even cartel intimidation once upon a time. But a woman so clearly well off, reduced to near death in the desert, with cryptic threats chasing her, reeked of bigger stakes than he'd ever faced. Later that afternoon, Sheriff Clay Daniels rolled up in a dusty patrol SUV. A longtime friend of the Wilder family, Clay, was a straight shooter with a spine of steel. Jacob met him on the porch, arms crossed. Heard you picked up a lost traveler, the sheriff said, his brow furrowed. Got a statewide alert about a missing person? Wealthy from out of town, Jacob's jaw tightened. She's inside resting, pretty shaken up. You think she's the one your bulletin's about? Sheriff Daniels gave him a long, assessing look. Might be. If so, she's in a world of trouble. Corporate fraud, blackmail, potential involvement in international deals gone south. The feds are sniffing around. He paused, scanning Jacob's face. You sure you want to be harboring her? Jacob shrugged. I'm not turning a half-dead woman out into the desert. That's not how we do things here. Daniels frowned but nodded. I'll keep it off the record for now, but if suits in black SUVs start showing up, you'd best watch your back. There's more to this story than what's in the bulletin. That evening, as the desert wind howled around the ranch house, Jacob checked on Serafina. She slept fitfully, beads of sweat on her brow, murmuring about Shanghai, about forged documents, about her father's dying wish. Jacob recalled the day his own father had passed, leaving him the ranch and a lifetime of quiet lessons. Something in Serafina's desperation resonated with him more than he cared to admit. He stroked Thunder's neck in the barn, lost in thought, when Diego rushed in. Boss, headlights on the road. Jacob's gut twisted. Bring me my rifle, he said quietly. Let's see who's come calling. The headlights belonged to a sleek black SUV that crunched to a stop in the ranch's gravel driveway. Two men in suits stepped out, scanning the property with hawk-like intensity. Jacob stood on the porch, one hand casually resting near his hip. He had no illusions. These men were trouble. Evening, he called, voice level. Can I help you? The taller of the two stepped forward, flashing a business card that read, Galaxy Executive Security. We're looking for a missing individual, Mr. Wilder. We have reason to believe she might be on your property. Jacob stared at the man, letting the silence stretch. Haven't seen anyone but tumbleweeds. The second suit flicked a glance at the barn, the house, the windows lit from within. Would you mind if we took a look around? Our client is worried about her safety, Jacob's expression hardened. Unless you got a warrant, you're not stepping foot past that fence. Last I checked, private property still means something in this county. A flicker of frustration crossed their faces. They exchanged a look silently, weighing whether to force the issue. The first man offered a tight smile. "If you do see anything unusual, you'll let us know, right?" Jacob gave a slow nod that conveyed exactly nothing. The suits departed with a squeal of tires and a spray of gravel. A short time later, Sheriff Daniels arrived in his patrol car looking more uneasy than before. "Heard from some local folks that a couple of men were asking too many questions. That matches them." Jacob nodded, relaying the conversation. The sheriff grimaced. Their so-called security company might have deeper pockets and darker connections than it seems. "Keep your guard up," inside Serafina overheard the exchange from her spot in the hallway. She pressed a hand against the wall to steady herself. Her fever still simmered, but adrenaline spiked when she recognized the men's description. They worked for Felix Song. "They're closing in fast. She thought I've run out of time." That night she paced the guest room, ignoring Doc Higgins's advice to rest. She rummaged through her handbag, checking a hidden compartment in the silver flask. A miniature data card was concealed within the culmination of her father's true plan. The USB drive Felix had brandished was nothing more than bait. The real evidence was this delicate sliver of plastic that could destroy Song International in the shadowy network behind it. Jacob, curious, knocked softly. "Trouble sleeping?" he asked, stepping inside. She turned startled, but she found a flicker of empathy in his gaze. "Yes," she admitted, "I need to leave. The longer I stay, the more risk I bring to you." He crossed his arms. "You can barely stand without wobbling, ma'am. Those men will be watching every road out of town. Where exactly do you plan to go?" She bit her lip, then decided honesty was the only currency left. "There's an airfield a few dozen miles northwest, private planes, no official flight logs. If I can get there unnoticed, I can disappear." She hesitated, scanning his face. "You've done more than enough for me, but I need your help. Or a car, at least." Jacob inhaled deeply. "If it were as simple as handing you a vehicle, you'd already be gone, right?" Her silence spoke volumes. "Song's people," she said, "they know the desert roads. They'll expect me to sneak out, but they don't know your land like you do." He considered. "I know ways around the highway, old trails that only a horse can navigate. Once you're beyond the canyons, you might get to that airfield. But that means leaving you open to their retaliation," she murmured. "They'll suspect you helped. People can get hurt. This ranch," Jacob's voice was quiet but firm, "I've seen worse threats than these corporate thugs. This land is in my blood. We defend our own, and those under our roof, you're under it." She swallowed, the magnitude of his offer overwhelming. "I don't understand why you're risking everything." He gave her a long look. "Because when I was drowning in debt, no one stepped up. People looked the other way. My father always taught me not to repeat that mistake. Might come back to bite me, but I won't leave someone to the wolves." Their eyes locked, a silent pact formed. Serafina nodded. "I won't make you regret it." Jacob turned for the door, pausing in the hallway. "First light, we'll head out. I'll gather supplies. You get some rest." She sank onto the bed. Heart hammering, sleep was the last thing on her mind. But she had no choice. The desert demanded physical readiness. With morning would come the race for her life and for the key to toppling a corrupt empire that had destroyed her father and now wanted her silenced for good. They set out at dawn, packing only essentials. Jacob insisted on traveling by horseback, trusting the narrow desert paths that trucks or cars would never manage. Serafina rode a gentle mare named Stardust, while Jacob saddled up Thunder. The rising sun caught on the metal water canteens and the rifles strapped to their saddles. The morning hush carried a sense of anticipation, as though the desert itself was aware of the confrontation drawing near. For the first hours they rode in relative peace, winding through shallow ravines and rocky passages. Serafina marveled at Jacob's knowledge of every boulder and bush, a map inside his head. She could almost forget the lethal threats chasing her. But reality intruded in the shape of dust trails on the horizon, moving too steadily to be ordinary travelers. Jacob pulled out his binoculars, cursing under his breath. 3 SUVs, maybe more. They're checking each side road, probably coordinating with drones or spotters. Serafina's mouth went dry, so they found a way to track us, or they're systematically sweeping the area. Jacob dismounted, leading Thunder behind a jutting rock face. Serafina followed suit, heart pounding. They have manpower technology. We have local knowledge, he said, scanning the surroundings. There's an old mining route about 4 miles west over rough terrain. My guess is they won't think to look there first. They navigated carefully across ground that crunched underfoot, mindful of cacti spines and hidden dips. Despite the tension, Serafina felt a strange exhilaration. The city had taught her boardroom tactics and subterfuge, but out here survival was raw and immediate. Every rock could provide cover or cause a broken bone. Every ridge was a vantage point or a potential trap. At midday, they paused in a shallow wash for water. The glare of the sun was severe, but Jacob found a rare patch of shade. Serafina swallowed her ration, refusing to complain. She'd almost died of thirst once. Already she wouldn't make the same mistake. Jacob studied the horizon. We're close to the old ranch where the cartel used to store contraband. Place has been abandoned for years. We can lie low until nightfall, then make a break for that airfield. They pressed on. By late afternoon, the ground flattened into a dusty stretch dotted with sagebrush. Serafina spotted tire tracks crisscrossing the dirt, a sign that their pursuers were near. Abruptly, thunder snorted ears, flicking forward. Jacob lifted a hand, signaling Serafina to dismount. They led the horses to a rocky outcrop just as two men appeared, rifles in hand. "Look at that one," called a sneer on his face. "A knight in shining armor and his damsel. Mr. Song will be pleased." The second man moved to flank them, forcing Jacob and Serafina toward the open. Jacob's jaw clenched. He passed the reins to Serafina. "Get back," he said under his breath. She tightened her grip on the rifle slung at her side. "I can handle a gun," both men laughed. "Drop your weapons," the first barked, raising his own. "Let's keep this simple." Jacob's answer was a single shot aimed near the man's feet. Dust exploded in a cloud. Before the second man could react, Serafina had leveled her rifle, eyes cold. "Next shot won't be a warning," she said, her voice icier than any corporate negotiation. The pair hesitated. "You can't take us both." The first one spat. He never got to finish the threat. A barrage of bullets zipped through the air from the left Diego and two ranch hands who had quietly followed at a distance, deciding their boss needed backup. The men in suits dropped to the ground, scrambling for cover. "Time to go," Jacob muttered, grabbing Thunder's reins. Serafina nodded, adrenaline flooding her veins. They swung back into their saddles with cover fire from Diego. They galloped off. Only when they'd put a mile of distance between themselves and the ambush did they pause to catch their breath. Serafina's heart hammered, but she felt no regret. She patted the hidden compartment in her flask, reassured that her father's real evidence was still safe. Jacob flashed her a tight grin, full of relief and pride. Nightfall would be their ally, but first they had to traverse an even more dangerous stretch of desert, one that would put them within striking range of the old ranch, and beyond that, the covert airfield. This was no longer a mere escape. It was a tactical war with each side matching cunning for cunning in the endless labyrinth of the desert. Darkness cloaked the land as they approached the abandoned ranch. It was a ramshackle collection of outbuildings circled by sagging fences. Once it had been a cartel waypoint, but law enforcement raids had driven the criminals off. Now it stood deserted and eerie. Jacob led the way inside the main structure, flashlight flickering over cracked walls and dusty floors. "We can hide here until dawn," he said, voice echoing in the stillness. "Then make the last push to the airfield." Serafina nodded, though her nerves were on edge. She kept the rifle close, scanning every corner. The tension between them had grown thick enough to taste a heady mix of shared danger and unspoken gratitude. They had saved each other repeatedly, forging a bond that felt strangely intimate under the desert stars. As they settled in a back room with a collapsed roof, Jacob rebandaged a scrape on Serafina's arm. She winced, but their eyes locked in a moment of shared intensity. "You're full of surprises," he murmured. "Never known a CEO who could shoot that straight." She allowed a half smile. "My father believed in thorough education. He said I should be prepared for any eventuality." Boardroom or battlefield, Jacob finished tying the bandage, his gaze never leaving her face. Seems he was right. Before Serafina could respond, the faint rumble of engines made both of them freeze. They killed the flashlight creeping toward a cracked window. A caravan of SUVs pulled up outside, headlights sweeping over the walls, Doors slammed and harsh voices carried in the night air. She recognized one voice instantly. Felix Songhart pounding. She peered through a gap in the planks. He stood in the moonlight flanked by the same suits who'd threatened her back in Manhattan. An imposing figure overshadowed them, a tall, older man in a crisp suit. This was Noah Caldwell, a high-ranking official turned corporate kingmaker, the very man Serafina's father had warned her about. If Caldwell was here, this was bigger than she'd realized. Felix's voice rose. Spread out. The pilot we bribed spotted a woman matching her description heading this way. She has the evidence. Jacob inched back from the window. They must have eyes at the airfield too. No surprise, Serafina exhaled quietly, mind racing. She had to protect that data card long enough to expose Caldwell's entire network. All the backroom deals, the hush money, the forged papers that brought Song International into her father's orbit. If Caldwell got his hands on it, her father's mission would die here in the desert. Jacob tugged her sleeve, motioning silently to a trapdoor in the corner. They slipped inside, descending a short ladder into what appeared to be a small storage cellar. The darkness pressed in on all sides. Dust billowed with each breath. Above them, they heard footsteps stomping across the floorboards and voices calling out in anger. Check every room, Felix demanded. If you find Wilder, bring him alive. Miss Wolf is worth more if she can stand trial for this fiasco. But if she won't cooperate, end her. Serafina felt Jacob tense. The trapdoor rattled as someone tried to yank it open. He braced it from below, straining to keep the intruder out. The wood cracked ominously. Serafina grabbed the rifle, flicking off the safety. She looked at Jacob, who gave her a curt nod. The moment the door gave way, the muzzle of Serafina's rifle met the first man's face. She fired once, not fatally, but enough to send him toppling back with a yell. They scrambled up the ladder, emerging into chaos. Another thug rushed at Jacob, who sidestepped and delivered a punishing strike with the butt of his gun. From the yard, Caldwell's bark carried. Find them, you idiots! Shots rang out, splintering the rotted walls. Adrenaline spiked in Serafina's veins. She and Jacob ducked behind a crumbling piece of furniture. She glimpsed Felix outside, rifle in hand. This ends now, Felix shouted. Give me the real evidence, Serafina, or watch everyone around you suffer. Jacob looked at her, time to make a stand. She squared her shoulders. I've run long enough. Together they bolted for a side door, returning fire at the men scattered across the yard. Darkness and desert dust swirled around them. They managed to reach the horses, yanking the reins free from the stable's half-collapsed post. But as they mounted, a bullet whizzed past, grazing Jacob's arm. He clenched his teeth against the pain. Urging Thunder forward, Serafina spurred Stardust, the mare's muscles coiling beneath her. They tore off into the night. Behind them, the old ranch exploded in an inferno of headlights, gun smoke, and furious shouts. The desert swallowed them whole, an impenetrable cloak, as they pressed toward the only hope left, a covert runway where Serafina might escape and finally release the evidence that would topple Caldwell and Song's entire empire. They rode hard through the night, weaving across scrubland under a canopy of stars. The desert turned cold wind, lashing at their skin. Jacob's wounded arm bled through the hastily tied cloth, and Serafina felt guilt tear at her. His life had been simple, tough, but straightforward, before she stumbled into it with a history of subterfuge on her heels. By the time they reached the dusty airstrip, dawn lightened the edges of the horizon. A single prop plane waited on a cracked runway, its pilot pacing nervously. He looked up as they approached, glancing warily at Jacob's bleeding arm and Serafina's rifle. You're late, he said in a low voice. Your friend Song has men crawling everywhere. Serafina slid off Stardust, ignoring the ache in her legs. We've had complications, she managed, swallowing her exhaustion. She pulled the miniature data card from its hidden compartment in the flask, offering it to the pilot. You know what to do. He nodded grimly, pocketing it. Transmit everything to every major news outlet and regulatory agency. I'll keep a copy safe. Jacob dismounted, staggering slightly as his wound throbbed. Serafina pressed a hand to his chest, steadying him. This man, who had every right to send her away, had risked his life to help fulfill her father's mission. She opened her mouth to thank him, but no words seemed sufficient. In the distance, the roar of engines shattered the fragile calm. Another SUV caravan tore up the makeshift road leading to the runway. Felix Song was at the wheel of the lead vehicle Caldwell. In the passenger seat, the fury on both men's faces, plain even from a distance. The pilot cursed under his breath, climbing into the cockpit. No time for a warm-up. Either get on or stay to fight. Serafina turned to Jacob. His eyes flicked to the plane, then to the approaching threat. She read in his expression a stubborn determination. Go, he urged. Finish what you started. I'll hold them off. Her heart clenched. You can't do this alone. You'll be outnumbered. He mustered a confident smirk. Diego and the ranch hands are out there. They've been tracking us. We have a little surprise waiting for Song's men. Even now, she could see clouds of dust in the far background, a sign that backup might be arriving. Desperate though the odds were, Jacob never seemed more at home than he did in the desert's chaos. Take my father's ring, she said impulsively, yanking it off her finger. If I don't make it out, keep his memory alive. And if I do, I'll come back for it. Jacob closed her hand over the ring, shaking his head. You keep that. Finish your mission. Then if there's anything left for us, we'll find out. Felix's SUV slammed to a halt a few hundred yards away. Men in suits piled out, raising their guns. Caldwell emerged last, glaring like a cornered viper. Wolf, he bellowed. Don't you dare take off. Serafina hesitated, her feet stuck to the runway in indecision. Jacob lifted his rifle, firing a warning shot. Go, he barked at her. Now the pilot hollered from the cockpit. She forced herself to sprint toward the plane's door. One of Song's guards took aim at her, but Jacob shot first, sending the man sprawling. More bullets whistled by. As the engine roared to life, Serafina clambered into the small cabin, the pilot already accelerating. The plane jerked forward, but she lunged to the window to look back. She caught one last glimpse of Jacob standing tall despite his injury, returning fire. Shadowy figures, Diego and other ranch hands, emerged from behind a dune, adding their rifles to the fray. Her chest tightened with worry and admiration. Then the plane lifted off wheels, leaving the ground in a burst of dust. She let out a shaky breath, fighting the surge of fear that she was abandoning Jacob to a fight he might not survive. But if she stayed, Caldwell and Song would crush any chance to expose them. As they climbed higher, the desert stretched below like a rugged tapestry. She saw the SUVs, the scattered figures firing guns, and the horses milling in alarm. In the glare of the rising sun, a faint line of jeeps approached from the south, federal agents, no doubt following the trail of corruption tied to Song and Caldwell. Serafina Wolf stared at the horizon, tears stinging her eyes. She clutched her father's ring, feeling the real evidence safely dispatched to unstoppable channels. Now the conspirators would face public scrutiny, unlike anything they'd ever imagined. Her father's last wish for their crimes to be brought to light would be fulfilled. But the question lingered. Would Jacob survive the desert storm he'd stepped into on her behalf? The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of revelations and media explosions. International news networks received the data drop. Forged signatures, financial statements, incriminating emails that led directly to Caldwell Song International. And a web of corporate and political corruption. Arrests rippled outward. Felix Song tried to flee abroad, but was nabbed at an airport. Caldwell, cornered by federal investigators, found no amount of bribes sufficient to escape the downfall. And what of Jacob Wilder, alive though wounded in the final standoff? His ranch, once threatened by a ring of black SUVs, now stood as a monument to defiance. Diego and the ranch hands had fought bravely until local law enforcement arrived. Sheriff Daniels, recovering from a near-fatal confrontation with Caldwell's henchmen, provided critical testimony. In the end, the fight was bigger than a simple desert rescue or a corporate takedown. It was about preserving a way of life, about honoring promises made to fathers long gone. When Serafina returned to the Wilder Ranch, she found the main house with a fresh set of bullet holes patched and an air of cautious celebration. Jacob was there, leaning on a new wooden rail, his arm still in a sling. The moment he saw her, the tension lifted from his features like a heavy burden. Dropping, Serafina dismounted the SUV that drove her in, and they locked eyes across the yard. Everything else faded. The workers hauling debris, the watchful federal agents concluding final interviews, the swirl of dust in the golden light. In that shared silence, the desert that had nearly killed her turned into the stage of a second chance. He took a step forward, a grin ghosting across his rugged face. You came back. She managed a shaky laugh. I did, with a promise to keep. From around her neck dangled the ring she'd nearly given him. She pressed it into his good hand. I owe you my life, not just for saving me out there, but for standing with me when you could have turned away. Jacob let the ring settle in his palm, then held it out to her again. Your father's legacy, your fight, you honored it. I just did what was right. They stared at each other, the desert wind carrying remnants of the chaos that had passed. Her father's mission was complete, and so was his father's teaching: help those who need it stand firm against wrong. In that moment, as the sun set and the ranch lights began to glow, something new crystallized between them. Something that neither the city's cynicism nor the desert's cruelty could destroy. Dinner, he asked softly, recalling a half-formed promise. If you're staying, she nodded, tears threatening to spill. Yes, I'm staying. In the distance, coyotes let out a chorus of howls as though cheering on the union of two souls who had fought battles on different fronts, only to converge in the simplest truth that sometimes a rescue in the desert saves more than one life. Sometimes it heals two hearts that needed the same hope. Serafina Wolf and Jacob Wilder turned toward the main house, walking side by side. The desert night closed in vast and star-studded. The story that began with a near-dead millionaire and a wary cowboy had found its resolution in the shifting sands and a promise to keep building something stronger than secrets or fear. Here on Wilder Ranch, they would weave a new future from the threads of trust, courage, and the unwavering power of choosing to do what's right, even when it costs everything. In the end, the desert that had once been a cruel enemy became the stage for redemption, justice, and the blossoming of unexpected love. Serafina and Jacob not only overcame the threats to their lives, but found in each other a strength they never knew they had, as the Wilder Ranch stood strong, symbolizing their victory over corruption and violence. They realized the most important legacy was the one they built together, rooted in trust, courage, and love. Thank you so much for joining us in this remarkable journey. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. Did you see that incredible twist coming? What would you have done differently if you were in Jacob or Serafina's shoes? Please leave your comments and opinions below. Let's discuss this thrilling adventure together.